Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. The Dangote Refinery raised petroleum prices by 13% as global oil and gas prices surge amid the escalation in the Middle East. With tensions and fears over disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, and Nigeria simultaneously moved to tighter petroleum revenue controls and a restructure of the disputed OPL 2245 block. How might raising global energy prices and Nigeria's domestic reforms reshape the country's oil revenue outlook? At least 25 civilians and 3 soldiers were killed in coordinated insurgent attacks in Adamawa, reflecting a sharp escalation of cross-border violence in the Sahel region. Then on Wednesday, an attack in Borno killed 19 soldiers, amongst others. How can regional security forces better coordinate to contain the growing insurgents? And our final story, Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has rescheduled the 2027 general elections to 16 January and 6 February 2027, following the enactment of the Electoral Act 2026, introducing new timelines for primaries and campaigns. How will the new electoral timelines affect political preparations and voter mobilizations ahead of the 2027 elections? All this and more to be discussed today. Joining us today for further insights is Confidence McHarry, our geopolitics analyst at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Confidence, to the podcast.
Hello, Veronica. It's good to be back here.
It's always a pleasure having you. I mean, the last week has been something crazy, but we're also seeing it affect the oil prices. There's a lot of tension going on in the Middle East. And we're seeing it, kind of affect petroleum prices. How do you think that these rising global energy prices and Nigeria's domestic reform can reshape the country's oil revenue outlook?
So, as a matter of fact, it is quite unlikely that Nigeria is going to benefit from these rising oil prices. You know, sorry, give me a second. Is Nigeria going to benefit from the oil prices? The answer is quite a no. Now normally this kind of thing is supposed to um, is supposed to lead to a situation where oil producing economies, not just the ones in the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Commissioners or countries rather, are supposed to be the ones to benefit because there will be demand would either remain at the same rates or would increase. Now, whenever there is tension and turmoil in the Middle East, it is always an opportunity for non-Middle Eastern economies to benefit. Um, the golden years of Nigeria's economic boom were in the 1970s, and the key defining moments of that decade was the Yom Kippur War of 1973 between Israel and its Arab enemies. So there was an Arab embargo on the United States and the larger West by the Arab states for supporting Israel. And so the Arab states, the West largely turned to Nigeria, Angola, and several other countries in the global south that are producing oil. And they got oil at, some sort of a premium, which enabled Nigeria to finance its post-war reconstruction efforts. In the 5 decades that have followed, Nigeria has not been able to, number one, cash in on the same largesse simply because oil production has fallen. And apart from that, everybody and the mother should know why oil production has fallen, and it's largely due to the issues in the Niger Delta, security issues, attacks on pipelines, and several other things. There's some people might cast their mind back to 2009 with the Yar'Adua administration doing the whole amnesty thing to get people back into to get young people to stop hitting the pipelines. But that has largely snowballed into oil theft. So we used to have militancy where oil workers found it difficult to reach their fields and they were subject to a lot of kidnappings, a lot of attacks. Nowadays, it is mostly been attacks on the pipeline themselves by oil thieves who are not necessarily militants, leading to a lot of environmental degradation. So I think Nigeria's oil production was therefore hit. It was taken from about 2.5 million barrels per day to something around 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. I think in our peak right now, we are producing something north of 1.6. We haven't really gotten back to the peak that we used to produce at the height of the the 51-day war in 2014. So what that simply means is that much of the oil that we have simply hedged it. All of the oil that we are producing and the ones we're going to produce in the future has been hedged and has been accounted for. Therefore, the people who naturally will be coming in a hypothetical scenario that we have not hedged, the people will be coming to buy Nigerian oil in this current political climate, we should be charging them more. Let's say if they were getting oil for $51 per barrel, with the events of the last week, where the Strait of Hormuz is now being closed, Israel and Iran is going to war, and as a result, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries are catching heat because Iran is attacking their countries and is attempting to take their oil production offline. We are supposed to be charging a premium, given that oil has risen to about $85 per barrel. But we are not. We are not able to cash in on that, given that all of the oil that we produce at the moment and all of the ones we're going to produce in the near term, we have hedged it in order to borrow to get loans for also finance some for our budgets and some infrastructure. So if there are countries that are going to have this windfall, Bloomberg actually predicts Angola, Nigeria, Ghana, and several other sub-Saharan African countries. But from the Nigerian standpoint, this is hardly tenable. Hardly tenable.
I mean, it's sad that we can't benefit as much as we should or we could.
Mm.
Sad. But another thing
Mm-hmm.
we're facing in Nigeria is also the insurgency issue. I mean, we keep coming back week after week, quite a number of weeks, even from last year. I'm still having this conversation this year. Was
Mm.
increase in an increase and an escalation in attacks. I mean, this week we saw Adamawa, Borno. I mean, this scale and coordination of these attacks suggests that there's kind of a growing insurgent capacity as opposed to us seeing a weakening capacity. I mean, with the intervention of the US as well. Um, what does this tell us about the current security situation, the architecture in the northeastern part of Nigeria? I mean, I think I've asked you this question quite a number of times, and we keep going back to what are we doing wrong? Why is this still here?
Yeah. You asked me this question a couple of times. Since you say asking me again, what do you want to hear?
I don't know. Like, this needs to go away because it's a sad situation we're facing, right? Because this can't continue. We can't keep living in a situation where people are being constantly attacked, people are being constantly killed. Not just, civilians. We're also having military, you know, officers, soldiers who are in the field. it seems
Oh,
like they're emboldened, instead of, being, reduced, or, the numbers going down. So where's Nigeria getting it wrong? And I know we've had these conversations, but
yeah. So the first place we have to look at is, for want of time, we'll have to look at those immediate factors for why the Adamawa killings happened. When the US struck Sokoto last year on Christmas Day, there was something Islamic State West Africa province did. Now, what Trump and his allies in the US said was that they were hitting Islamic State position in the northwest, especially in Sokoto. There are some people, Akhled being one of them, who believe that Likurawa, which is the primary Islamist group that operates in Sokoto, is the Islamic State Sahel province. I think that assumption is what feeds the US into thinking that they were actually hitting Islamic State forces or Islamic State fighters in Sokoto. However, we, the security department at the SBM, have a different view. We do not think that the Islamic State Sahel province is that operates in Western Niger in Tilaberi and some parts of Burkina Faso is the same thing as the Likurawa. We believe that the Likurawa is a different group. However, that hasn't stopped the Islamic State West Africa province from vowing to revenge and vowing to retaliate against that strike by targeting Christian communities on the border between Nigeria and Cameroon. And since December, they have actually begun, or they have actually increased the tempo of the attacks. As a matter of fact, just a few hours before recording this podcast episode, there was an attack on another Adamawa community where ISWAP was clearly telling them that they have to repent or they would continue to face attacks. When they say repent, when I say repent, I mean that they say that those Christian communities have to convert to Islam because they see them as apostates, have to convert to Islam or keep dying and paying zakat before they die. You know. Now, this issue have become so much of a problem because the Nigerian military is heavily focused on the northeastern state of Borno, where the Islamist insurgency is at its most intense. It has been pinned down ever since late 2024, I think from October 2024. The Islamic State of Saka province got into this sort of a mini truce, and I use that word mini truce conservatively with their rival JS faction, which enabled them to recover from some of the losses they suffered from 2022 to early 2024. It enabled them to recoup, to just simply get better and strengthen their position. And they came back with the full force. So from October 2024 till date, they have been launching near daily attacks on Nigerian military positions in the northeast, which some people have attributed to the Holocaust strategy or burn the camp strategy, where they will not just attack military bases, they will kill if they're not repelled, they will steal weaponry, and they will burn those camps down. They have been doing this thing, and the Nigerian government or the Nigerian military was only able to mount a response after about 2 to 3 months. Because at the beginning of 2025, the Nigerian military was heavily losing. Now, that pinning down in Borno has made it impossible for the government, for the military to commit troops to secure Adamawa. Yes, in the past, when the Boko Haram insurgency began in 2013, so much so that the Jonathan administration had to declare state of emergency in the northeast, Bono, Adamawa, and Yobe were the three states that had states of emergency. But over time, in the lead up to 2018, or in the lead up to 2017, rather, the military was able to contain the insurgency to Borno State, which left Adamawa relatively free. But with the super camp strategy that was devised in 2017 and 2018, it just gave the insurgents a lot of wiggle room, so much so that the much more militant faction as of them, which was the Shekau-led Jazz faction, which attacked civilians indiscriminately, was able to gain a foothold in Adamawa within the Mandara Mountains and deep into Cameroon. But in more recent times, ISWAP has also advanced, given that some of the heat they are suffering, or some of the heat they're getting rather, in Borno has forced them a little further south. And they have now had a lot of presence in Adamawa. So in places like Madagali, for instance, in places like Hong local governments, they have been running riots, and the Nigerian military has not been able to put up any resistance. So this is the background where the whole thing is coming to a head at the moment. And if you couple some of the geopolitical issues that Nigeria has had to deal with in the past 6 months, you come to find that the intensification of the violence against civilians by the Islamic State in Adamawa begins to make sense. But the problem now is that we do not know if the recent deployment of American military advisors into the Northeast is going to expand the operational theater into Adamawa, because if the military continues on their trajectory to focus on strengthening their positions in Borno, there is a chance that with American firepower and American pressure, they are going to leave. That's the militants are going to flee the scene, and we are seeing a little bit of insights into that. That beyond Adamawa, we are starting to see an uptick of violence in Gombe. I have to tell you that in the lead up to 2025 ending, Gombe was actually the most peaceful state in Nigeria. Right now, given that it is now a prisoner of geography, given its proximity to Bauchi. Okay, so as I was saying, that the Americans were led to believe, based on their own reading of the situation, that the terrorists or the groups they were attacking was what is it called now? The Islamic State. Meanwhile, for what we believe in at SBM is that the groups that are based in Sokoto are not necessarily the Islamic State themselves, but actually Likurawa. And it led to ISWAP in the Northeast deciding that every Christian they find, especially in their base of operation in the Northeast, are going to pay for that attack by the Americans. And true to their promise, they have ramped up attacks on Christian communities, not just in Adamawa alone, but also in the extreme northern parts of Cameroon where they operate in. And another key reason why these attacks have been so successful is that since 2016, 2017, downward to 2013, most of the Nigerian military operations focused largely on Borno and Adamawa, but ever since that period, from 2017 downward, with what they call a successful quarantining of the insurgents, they largely let perimeter areas like Adamawa and Yobe suffer attacks, which directly stems from the supercamp strategy of 2018, 2019 that basically ceded a lot of ground to the militants, have enabled them to have free reign. I was looking at a statistic earlier today and I found that according to UN estimates, the Islamic State of Central Province possesses about 7 to 10,000 fighters. Not all of them are based in Borno State. A lot of them are running parallel governance in Adamawa. And the military hasn't really risen up to the challenge because given the burn the camp strategy or the Holocaust strategy that the Islamic State started in late 2024 after their short truce with the Jazz faction, which used to be led by Abubakar Shekau, it has given them this sort of a breathing room for them to attack the Nigerian military positions relentlessly from late 2024. It took about 2 months for the Nigerian military to rise from their slumber and try to repel and take the fight to them. But even at that, they had mixed results, as seen in the killing of Brigadier General Uba in late 2025. All of this to say that Adamawa is at the least level an expendable state in the grand scheme of things, because even if the military were to be able to want to do some sort of a protective duties in that area, they are actually pinned down in Borno. Several of the camps are being attacked, and as a result, Adamawa is a free reign for ISWAP. And I do not have that much optimism for the fact that given the arrival of American defense advisors, the Northeastern Theater is going to expand, especially in and around Borno. But the question then becomes or remains, are they going to focus also on Bauchi? Are they also going to focus on Adamawa? Because if all of the focus is on Boko Haram in the Lake Chad, there is every tendency that they are going to be fleeing the violence or fleeing the pressure from the air, and they're going to be entering into neighboring states for shelter, which means that the optical and the violence we're seeing in communities in Gumbi, as well as the intensifying violence in Bauchi, are simply going to reach astronomical levels. Adamawa is also going to be heavily affected because in this current iteration, it's only maxed out, and we are going to be seeing having a lot of problems on our hands. So it remains to be seen. But from my own reading of the situation, given the government response to situations in Adamawa, it doesn't really leave much room for optimism. In the next coming weeks, it is going to get better.
I mean, it's sad to hear that as well. That's not the situation doesn't seem to get better. I mean, the Nigerian government needs to wake up quickly, and pretty fast. I'm on to our final story. So INEC the Electoral Act 2026 has finally been passed, and it introduced new timelines for elections, primaries, campaigns. INEC had earlier released election dates based on the previous Electoral Act, but I mean, with the new Electoral Act and the changes that it made, INEC had to, reschedule the elections. Interestingly, we're going to see the elections coming in January. When crossing over from a previous year to a new year, and it's kind of like we're going to say really, really early. But onto the question, how will the new electoral timelines, how do you think it will affect party preparations? That's one. And voter mobilization ahead of the 2027 elections. I mean, we're already seeing political parties scrambling to adopt digital registration of party members. But I mean, that's one angle. But how do you see it affecting, party preparations as well as voter mobilization ahead of the elections?
I think the one of the key issues that we would now have to deal with this fast track timeline would be in terms of voter registration. Ahead of the 2020 elections, we had considerable time from 2021 till about 2022 for a lot of people, especially young people who are voting for the first time, to get registered to vote. With this accelerated timeline, it is quite possible that we're going to voter registration, especially the continuous voter registration exercise, is going to be affected if we're going to be seeing the kind of lumps that they did post enters. Yes, there is also the fact that not so many people within the same demographics are that much interested in the polls. But even if we are to make the argument that some people are still going to be interested, the timeline doesn't seem to favor them. It seems rather short. We are in March, which gives us rather give or take 9 months to get this thing done. And it's in terms of mobilization, it also gives the political parties, the participating parties in this case, some sort of a leeway to innovate. This is an accelerated timeline, which therefore means that hello, Veronica, are you there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. This is an accelerated timeline, which means that they now have to look for innovative ways. As you mentioned previously, some of them have looked to online registration of some of their members, so that is a good step. But then the question then becomes, how much time will they have between them registering their members and then verification? Because this week I saw something online about how the old online registration thing appears to be a sham because it could literally walk in there, put in any sort of verification in terms of identity management or identity card. You could use a made-up name, NIN. It could be use a made-up name, and the party will just simply accept it. So all of this infrastructure to verify these things should naturally take time if they know what they're doing. But they are not really doing that. It could also be automated in the sense that if you put in wrong information, the system is supposed to flag it. But not so much thought have been put into that. So I don't know if I am supposed to attune this to the fire brigade approach which Nigerians have towards a lot of issues, or to just see it as them being a victim of the current circumstance. But whichever way one looks at it, I do think that the election will be held. Maybe if it is not held well, that is ahead of that is the 2026 election, 2027 elections rather. Many of the postmortem that will be done will be, I think, a lot of time will be spent on assessing whether or not the timeline was too short for the electoral umpire to get it act together, and whether or not the same timeline was too short for the political parties to get it on their act. But I think where it will become a lot more clearer if the timeline is going to be affected by the outcome of the election will be in the party primaries that they have now scheduled for, I think, April to June, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me.
Yes.
Yes, so that is where it become a little more apparent. So I think it's still something that remains to be seen. I just have to keep my faith.
Yes, just to confirm, like what you said, the conduct of the party primaries will commence the 23rd of April, 2026, and it will end 30th of May, 2026. The presidential and national assembly campaigns will commence on the 19th of August, 2026. Governorship and State House will commence 9th of September, 2026, and campaigns would end 24 hours before election day. Presidential election, like we mentioned earlier, January 16th, and governorship elections February 6th. Very, very interesting. We're looking forward to how the elections will go, and kind of like how the parties will be able to navigate these, sharp timelines. That's all for today. Thank you very much, Confident, for being on the podcast as usual. It's always fun. I mean, it's sad when we have to talk about security issues, but interesting when we have to talk about elections and other issues as well.
I'm always here for the sad stuff.
No, we're not here for this sad stuff. We're always here for the good stuff.
I'm only always here for the sad stuff. Whenever you have the sad stuff, you and Cheta, you will bring me in. So Cheta may have a prophetic sense. I can call him Cheta Nostradamus. Whenever there has to be very sad security stuff, he
But I
just
mean,
schedules me in. So
it's
yeah.
good. It's good that we have the new, Electoral Act passed. I mean, we saw it pass fast, but not only that we saw it pass fast, we saw a lot of citizen engagement with the passage of the Electoral Act, calling for the mandatory transmission of electoral results, transmission of results. And, we saw the response from the National Assembly. Although we didn't get what we wanted, there was kind of some tweaking here and there. But I mean, it's just a reminder as well that, adding our voices to the electoral vote, the electoral process matters, and the legislative process as well. And it just showed that if we had been engaged and with the system from the beginning and just kind of like pushing, we may have had so many things passed. And we look forward to, I mean, the next time the Electoral Act is going to be amended for us to be able to participate fully. And hopefully, more Nigerians, take the opportunity to participate in the electoral process, and to secure our votes, yeah, and ensure that the person that comes out is someone who, is truly for the people. Thank you. Always interesting. To all our listeners, this podcast by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find your podcast. If you haven't already, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts. Also share with a friend, so that you can have intellectual stimulating conversations and, learn how you contribute more to the development of our nation as well. For deeper insights into the work of SBM Intelligence, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember that you can always connect with us on all our social media platforms. We're just one search away. You can search for us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you very much for tuning into the week ahead. We look forward to you joining us next Friday, where we share more updates that are shaping the African continent. Thank you.